Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Autocar Changemakers podcast in association with Tomorrow's Journey. I'm Felix Page, I'm Autocar's news editor. Joining me today in the studio is Chris Kirby, CEO of Tomorrow's Journey, and Joseph Seal, driver, who's here to talk to us in his position as a mobility industry expert. But you've got several titles to your name, haven't you?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm the commercial director of Sustainable Ventures, who one of the core functions of Sustainable Ventures is to support climate tech businesses, and a lot of that is in mobility. And next to that, I'm a trustee of the charity Como UK, which is the national charity for shared transportation.
Before we come into what those roles mean, I just want to talk about something that you've done over the weekend, which I think is particularly pertinent when you're talking about sustainable mobility. You went to every Santander bike docking station in London.
Yes, as part of a team of transport geeks, we did along with the Turing Institute and London Data Week, we docked at and undocked at every Santander cycle station in London. There was 5 different teams, 80 kilometres, and the bikes are quite heavy. Yeah,
they're not assisted, are they? They are pure.
No, we didn't take an electric bike. Other teams might have done, but it was quite a fun thing to do because we started at a pub in near the Strand and went out and then came back again. And it was kind of a race to get to all of the docks, and it was a kind of live visualization as well.
I think the thing I'd be most scared about is the software, is the system behind it, because I always feel like when you really want it to work, that's when it fails you. Was it all good?
I didn't have any issues the entire day.
That's good news.
And that's different to the time we did it last year. I did it on a Monday, and some of the docks were full on a Monday because the flows were a bit different. But yesterday, being a Sunday, it was actually really easy, so there's no problems.
Maybe we should stop moaning about our commutes.
Yeah, absolutely. And was that a thing you guys did? You just part of the challenge was planning the route and all of that stuff, not a preset one. So was there bits of tools and things you used for that? What was the signature? Did you win actually? Was it a race?
Oh, we didn't lose.
Okay, that's nice.
So I think there was one team who got there very quickly. I think there may have been some electric bikes involved. I'm not going to throw shade. I think electric bikes aren't cheating, but so that's. But then the other 3 teams arrived at the same time. There's a gent called Oliver O'Brien who is the kind of preeminent data scientist looking at bike sharing services globally, and he set up the routes for us. So it's nice. So one-way streets and London 10Ks and all that kind of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
It's pretty cool, yeah. It's fun. If you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I think I'll leave it to you. But
yeah, sounds good. Well, Joe, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you joining us today. I think interestingly, compared to some of our other guests, your background is kind of really varied, and you've covered a lot of the mobility areas. We're often talking to people about a specific topic, and we're going to touch on a few different things today. But I guess for our listeners, maybe just give us a bit of an overview on your background. I think it's super interesting, and then we'll pick up some of those topics.
Thanks. So I think I've worked in mobility since leaving uni about 17, 18 years ago, and across that time I've worked in leadership roles in car sharing, bike sharing, chauffeur services, and also worked with OEMs, JLR and BMW, in their innovation arms or new innovation services before joining Sustainable Ventures. So I've been around the block a little bit in that time.
Yeah, awesome. And I guess from the Sustainable Ventures view then, so when you sort of now, I guess, taking a look at the industry, not from the outside, but from a kind of neutral position, investor position. What are the kind of trends that you're starting to see in the market? What are the things that you're focused on, interested in, kind of over the next few years?
So I think the things that I'm most bullish about at the moment, quite interested in, are e-cargo bikes, cargo bikes in general, electric vehicles, and e-bikes as part of that mix. I think are huge. We're going to see a lot more of that coming out, and I think there's going to be a lot more businesses around those around that sector. I think there's also a lot of stuff coming around battery health and EV, around the second life of vehicles. So one of the businesses that Sustainable Ventures has actually span out is a company called Clearwatt, who do battery diagnostics. So it's not a dongle or you put in a car. It's actually just a software check, and it allows you at the end of your ownership of an EV to give a kind of rating about the health of that battery, which allows you to sell it.
This is a big thing for EVs, isn't it? Because often the state of charge indicator only has 8 bars on it or something, and it's not particularly accurate if you want to really tell someone this battery has 93% capacity left. So does that use a digital twin? Is that what they...
I'm not actually sure on the tech. I'll have to ask the founder Patrick for that. But I know that they're actually kind of at revenue stage now. So people are paying for it. And what you're able to do is check the health of the battery and also the history of the types of charging. I previously worked at a CPO, a charging point operator, as well. And if a vehicle is charged on ultra rapid and all the time, then the battery health degrades. And I think when you're buying a vehicle, if it might say one careful owner, but if that careful owner has charged the battery at ultra rapid, then rather than at home, then I think that should have an impact on the resale value. But I don't actually think that's obvious at the moment in the market.
Yeah, it's definitely the least obvious, isn't it? I guess when you're traditionally buying a car, you can look if it's got bumps and scrapes. You can't always tell if someone's driven it hard or not, unless you go, mechanical check around if you kind of know what you're doing. But with this, it's like inside the battery. There's not a way of lifting the hood and having a little poke around and going, oh, it looks like it's been well maintained. It's a really interesting one.
I think it's something that OEMs and the industry probably needs to get a handle on quite quickly. You saw the impact of Tesla dropping prices and the impact that had on the second-hand value of like I-Paces and other premium electric vehicles. Actually, the impact that has on people being able to buy electric vehicles, because if you had an I-Pace and then you were going to sell it and it's dropped by 5,000 because Tesla have dropped their prices, which means that new buyers going in are going to get the the concept. But
totally. It's definitely one of those challenges, and I think understanding some of the things that making people nervous are things like that battery health, because it's a thing that you can't see. So if you're a traditional car buyer for a dealership group or something, it's a lot harder to kind of judge those numbers. So definitely an interesting thing. And in terms of some of the kind of wider mobility trends, we were talking about things like ownership into usership and some of those things. Kind of how do you see some of that evolving?
So I think in the UK we're probably we're a bit behind at the moment. So car sharing services are probably a bit more prominent on the continent. I think that's just, maybe it's Brexit, maybe it's just the UK being a more difficult operating environment. But London, I think, has a few different car sharing offers at the moment, and probably could do with a few more, in my opinion. The fact that it's fractured as a unitary authority, has like 34 different boroughs, it's quite hard to actually come in here and launch. So if you look at over in Germany, I think you have Miles Mobility. You have Sixt as well, doing quite a lot of stuff over there, and then you have quite a lot of large operators. But in the UK, you pretty much have Zipcar and Enterprise, and then a few others like Autocar, etc.
Yeah, and I think that peer-to-peer market was quite big. We had Xavier from Shuro on earlier, but I think it's still quite a hard model to scale here in London, where you thought it potentially might be a big opportunity. I think they've done well, but some of the others have struggled, particularly through the pandemic. So yeah, it's definitely that the sharing thing is challenging. And one of the interesting things I always find about London, people don't realise, which you briefly mentioned, is about the unitary authorities and the difficulty. And I guess that's not just for sharing, but also for any mobility service. But maybe just to explain a little bit about that, because it's probably a thing people don't really understand. But the fact it's difficult you have to do it by authority almost. You can't have a proper strategy.
So Paris, by comparison, Mayor Hidalgo, you have. Paris got its own difficulties, but you have a unitary authority that can make decisions for most of the city. Sadiq Khan doesn't have that power here. The powers are kind of put down to the borough level. So every borough has about 250,000 people thereabouts living in it. Islington, Camden, etc. There's 32 of them, including the City of London. So getting decisions through about which car club or which bike share operator is actually quite difficult, because every authority has their own conditions and their own way of working, which is legit for that borough. But then as a whole, it actually makes it quite difficult to operate. For example, Camden Council, you cannot drop a free-floating car sharing vehicle in Camden Council. Zipcar operates free-floating pretty much everywhere else in London, apart from in that borough. So there's a kind of bit of a black hole there, for example. And there's plenty of these other examples. And it would be great if London had a central repository for decision making and ideas on that.
This is really interesting. So where I live in the borough of Hounslow, and people have got really fed up with line bikes being left just dumped on the street, blocking the pavement. So the council has now set up zones where you can drop these bikes. And it's amazing to me, because no other borough that I know of has these designated zones. They've taken a space in every car park and everything. And the lengths people will go to not leave their bike in these zones is baffling to me. But I guess that's just a one borough trying to make a London-wide service work for its own purposes, but maybe it doesn't always suit.
I think actually the e-scooter trials have those virtual docks in quite a lot of places in central London. I think they're quite well policed, actually. I think there's the bikes outside of central London going into Hounslow and other areas, I think may be a bit more difficult. I think we're getting there slowly. So I think only a few days ago there was tender information awarded to Tier, Dot and Voi, the micromobility scooter operators, for the next round of the e-scooter trials. So I think they're actually delivering a really consistently good quality service, but admittedly they're still in quite a small area of London. I would love to see that grow along with the bike share operations to the rest of the city, in a higher way, in a higher proportion of vehicles available. I think part of the reason that you're thinking about people parking in the wrong place is at the moment there's a bit of misuse going on with some of the bikes. So if you hear someone cycling past and it goes click 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 click, that means they've basically found a hack to get into the bike and use it.
It always looks like harder work than walking, I think.
You don't have if you're doing that. I think kids will find out on Snapchat or TikTok or whatever. Maybe it's Threads now. I don't know. But they found out a way of getting into the bike and using it for free without the battery actually powering them. But what that means is the operator might not necessarily know where the bike is, and also if the person's borrowed it or stolen it temporarily, they're not incentivized to leave it in the right place. So we're still going through these hiccups around the technology and software and hardware developing, but the end result will be that if you're coming back from a gig late at night or you're running late, some of these services should be available to you. I think they are a benefit to the city in general.
Yeah, and how do you see them kind of scaling as a collaborative effort? Because I guess scooters is an interesting one. I actually have always found it fascinating watching the scooter market grow. Huge amounts of investment, and I always felt that scooters have a place amongst a mix of shared mobility, and for a while, particularly kind of pre and maybe a bit in the pandemic, people were like, oh, this is the future of getting around. And I guess we're both keen cyclists, so we see the value in bikes, but there's nothing wrong with a bike and it doesn't do anything that much different to a scooter. But how do you kind of see that landscape evolving? And we were talking about VCs being burnt in the micromobility space, but it's definitely a key part of our future in cities. But it's going to have a different mix, I think. Yeah,
I mean, my personal direction would be I much prefer bikes. I think e-scooters have a good part to play. They're a lot more accessible. My kid is like a year and a half now. In another half a year, year or so, he'll probably be scooting about rather than being on a balance bike rather than
Yeah.
a bicycle which we grew up with. So actually there's a kind of generational thing as well where scooters are a lot more accessible. And also if you're wearing a skirt or what have you, riding a bike's more difficult. So I do think scooters are really good for the short journeys and bikes may be good for slightly longer ones. So it's important to have both, but bikes still exercise even if it's an e-bike and the scooter isn't. So I think there's and Paris has banned shared scooters now, and I think in favour of bikes, shared bikes. So I think there's the verdict's still out, but I think they have a smaller part in the mix than maybe the businesses that started in 2017-18 and onwards thought.
What was the main motivation in Paris for banning e-scooters?
You'd have to ask them, but I think they asked Parisians to vote in person about whether or not they should have e-scooters or not. So the people that were generally annoyed about e-scooters are probably saying something quite controversial here, but are a bit older, probably didn't like them being parked on the pavement, didn't like them being used, and probably the generation that would vote for them would probably vote for them in electronic format and didn't want to go to the polling stations. So I think the vote was probably disproportionate. And if you actually did surveys on the street, there maybe be a different result. I still think that maybe they'll bring them back in time.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, maybe they'll look at the progression of other cities. So they still think the mix that nowhere's absolutely nailed it in terms of the mix, not just in the micro-mobility sense, but where we're talking about car sharing, actual cars themselves, owned vehicles coming in and out of cities, as well as the micro-mobility. That balance. I don't know. I'm sure there are cities out there that've got a good balance, but it seems like everyone's kind of finding it's a bit in flux still in getting that structure.
I think we'll find out. I think every city will have a different mix actually.
Totally.
Lisbon's got lots of hills.
Scooters don't work. Well, they do work in Lisbon as long as you're on the flat bit on the front. As I can, if you're a 118 kilo rugby player up a cobbled street on a wet day, scooters don't work. I can personally vouch for that.
I'd like to see that actually.
no, you don't.
I'll tell you, Bristol's really big on e-scooters. The first place I tried one actually, and that's a very hilly place. So you do find yourself doing sort of 1 mile an hour up a hill with a dustbin lorry behind you. It can be a bit hairy, but they're good fun. I think that's at the heart of it. Is I quite enjoy riding them. So
I think Tier have just won that contract now, so they've got e-bikes and e-scooters coming into the West Midlands. I think West Country.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that mix is a good one. And on the topic where we've been touching on micro-mobility, you touched earlier on Como and that organisation, but tell us a little bit about Como, your involvement in them, but also just what they do and kind of their role.
So I've been a trustee for about 5 years now, and Como UK used to be called Bike Plus and Car Plus, and we put the name together, and it's the charity for shared mobility. So I think about that as the unbundling of the car or the private car. So that's demand responsive transport, so on demand minibuses, kind of shared ride hailing. You have bike share, car share, lift sharing as well, and they do a lot of work on kind of creating mobility hubs as well. So basically transport nodes where you can swap different ways of travelling, and so they've been going for going on 20 years or something like that now, and they've been doing an annual survey for donkeys, and they also provide advice to local authorities. So local authority who wants to put in some of those services, often that part of the local authority, the planning division, doesn't necessarily have the experience because they've had cuts or people have moved on and they've kind of been under-resourced. So actually it's a good way of finding out what the best practice is for local authorities to speak to Como UK, and at the same time they support the industry when government is thinking about policy. But yeah, so that's the kind of things they do.
Yeah, awesome. That sounds super interesting. And while you were first getting involved in that, you were working a bit with JLR, so within InMotion. So another thing we wanted to touch on. But again, maybe tell us a bit about that role, because it was interesting. Again, also at work operating in London and.
So InMotion Ventures is the corporate venturing arm of Jaguar Land Rover. I started there in 2018 as a EIR, which is an entrepreneur in residence, which is a very fancy title, but basically meant I came with like a few ideas, and so I had 10 ideas that I thought were really good. They weren't. Three were passable, and two were businesses that were potentially investable. One was a premium e-bike sharing service called Dash, and we got it to a JV stage, and then with a bike sharing operator and a premium e-bike manufacturer, and then decided not to do it. And Haven was the premium electric chauffeur service that we launched through InMotion Ventures and subsequently sold to Blacklane after the pandemic, or during the pandemic. So that was a pretty cool journey.
Sort of the extreme opposite ends of the mobility spectrum of e-bikes and chauffeuring, but I guess operate on similar principles.
Yeah, I mean, the Dash was based on kind of hub to hub premium sharing. So you go to hotels or you go to WeWorks and those kind of locations, and you'd offer via the cycle to work scheme access to nice e-bikes for people to commute home in and come back to work in. And actually, if we'd have done that, we'd probably found a very good market for it during COVID, which is people not wanting to use public transport at the time. So kind of maybe it would have been interesting to have done that, but you only have that with hindsight. And Haven, we attacked what was kind of the craziest market to go after, which was Uber and Addison Lee in pre the pandemic. If you asked anyone on the street if there was room for another chauffeur offering, they'd have said absolutely not. But we did a lot of work on thinking about what our product market fit could be. We did a lot of service design, we did a lot of competitor analysis, and we figured that actually launching a business based on electric only, employed chauffeurs, and reliability would work. It doesn't sound like that bananas. So those building business on those three pillars, but taking Uber on directly in London was probably not something you would have naturally got investment for if you'd gone to the BC community.
Well, exposing my ignorance for a second, but can you just tell me in your mind what differentiates a chauffeur service from a ride-hailing service like Uber?
So it's the driver. So there's a real difference between etiquette and how you feel when you're in the vehicle. Okay. So you may well get into a ride-hailing service which has got a nice car, but they haven't got out of the car to welcome you into it. When you get into the vehicle, all their stuff's on the front dash. There's things hanging down. They're not wearing the right equipment or the right clothing. They don't check your destination. If you're going to the airport, they don't check if you've got your passport with you. There's so many little things that actually make up to the chauffeur service rather than a driver. But I think when you've been in one.
The music would be a big thing for me, I think, as well. The radio that's on.
Exactly.
I won't name any stations or artists now, but
so with Haven, you had the ability to set your preferences. So before you booked a ride, a journey, and you'd be able to say, "This is the music I want. This is the temperature." We'd know on the system whether or not you'd booked with previous chauffeurs before, and we'd try and give you that chauffeur. We also had 100% reliability, so we only accepted jobs that we could do. So if you're going to Gatwick at 5:30 a.m. something horrific like that, and you don't want to be messing around with trying to find another chauffeur if they cancel on you last minute. We would only accept the jobs that we could do based on our availability, and so you're booking and we can't do it, we'll give you maybe an alternate time. But I think customers really like that. So we had 9,000 customers use the service, and then we thought we'd beaten our MPV. JLR was really happy. We were talking to an energy company about a JV, which was looking like really quite exciting. And then COVID, and then 90% of the journeys disappeared overnight. And at that point, we were kind of going, what happens? And thankfully, we sold the business to Blacklane, which is the global chauffeur service backed by Daimler, and they took it in along with my team and the chauffeurs as part of a kind of acqui-hire, and we then became Blacklane Electric, and subsequently I think had a really, really fantastic time within that business. Stayed there for 2 years.
Oh, awesome. Okay, yeah, nice. And how was the transition for you, kind of operating in a? So I guess it's not quite in-house OEM innovation. It's very, very split with Emotion Ventures, but still OEM backed. How was that experience, and how was that operation?
Well, I don't think we could have launched Haven out of the box as a startup without the backing of JLR. It really mattered to the chauffeurs that they were driving an I-Pace and the Jaguar brand. I think it gave us a lot of credibility with customers, and so I think while corporate innovation gets beaten on sometimes, on Twitter, etc., I think in this instance you couldn't do it without that backing. I certainly found it to be a great experience. As I think it's like being an entrepreneur with stabilizers. You've got, so for example, we had fantastic data science people that we could lean on. HR we could lean on, and it's all those kind of wraparound services that you as the entrepreneur can just deliver the core things you need to do. It's actually what Sustainable Ventures do for the accelerator program. Is that they provide money into businesses they're investing in, climate tech businesses, but it's also all the wraparound services that allow the entrepreneur to focus on the things they're trying to do.
We're seeing this quite a bit more, aren't we? OEMs getting into that space with capital venture arms and exploring new ways of making their products more widely available, I guess. Was that a big thing for JLR, do you think, making the products cater to a different audience than might have previously experienced them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they have a premium car rental service and a premium subscription service, and we had a premium chauffeur service. But the businesses that were closer to the core function of JLR, selling cars, I think naturally had a stronger relationship with the service to the core business, while the service of a chauffeur operator was a nice to have. It was maybe a bit further away. So yeah, I think I think you'll see a lot more of that happening because it makes sense. And corporate innovation is, as I say, it's kind of gets a bad knock sometimes, but I think there's a place for it.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line. I find it really interesting to see a lot of these things evolve, and I think sometimes in corporate innovation there's a real drive almost for innovation's sake. It isn't really innovation, it's like these kind of projects. Someone described it to me once as corporate entertainment. It's like, put some money over here and let's all do something that's fun, and we can sit on some beanbags, and like that becomes a real waste of money and a waste of effort. But if you can, as you described, you can use the name and the organisation to build something that wouldn't be able to be built on its own. I think that's where the value comes, and it's getting also the fine line between the stabilizers and the jeopardy aspect together. We've worked with companies over time doing stuff, and when you've fully got when it's not even stabilizers, when it's just like you're fully protected, there's no jeopardy. A lot of what makes startups successful is the fact that you're going, right, well, I need to do this thing, otherwise can't put food on the table, can't pay my staff. that's a bit stressful at times, you know, personally vouch for. But if you take that away totally, then everyone's just like, oh yeah, cool, right, chill. So you have to get that balance right. And it sounds like they did.
The team was certainly brought in. There was certainly like a few red eyes around in the morning occasionally, and occasionally over the weekend. So and I think the risk and reward was there as well for myself and the rest of the team. So I think that was an issue. The only downside, I think, of being in that situation was you have a lot of reports. So there are a lot of senior people within Jaguar Land Rover obviously interested in what you're doing because it has a bearing on what cars they should build in the future for chauffeur services. So all of a sudden, you've got 9,000 customers who have an opinion on that. So what if you were a straight VC company without that? You could be 100% focused on that. So there's a little bit of drift, but I think on balance it was certainly a worthwhile thing to do, and I would certainly recommend it.
Yeah, definitely.
To entrepreneurs looking at
There's
that.
no clear line through it. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I think if you take all that jeopardy away, then you lose focus. If you have too much jeopardy, then it becomes difficult, and you're on a knife edge, and it's really easy to fall over or to fall off. So there almost isn't a perfect path through. If you can get those balances, I think it's good. And in that kind of corporate innovation, but then kind of spinning that question or that theme out a little bit more, thinking about who the kind of players might be in the mobility space, maybe some of these corporates that are able to innovate or pivot. Where do you think some of the disruptors is the wrong word, but some of the challenges are going to be from the kind of auto and mobility space?
I think there's so many things happening. As I said, there's in electric vehicles and in batteries. I think there's a lot of work, a lot of innovation coming in that space. I think there's from in the B2C space, two interesting businesses I've seen, Acura and Kaha. So they're basically apps that I forget when my MOT is. So put in when your MOT is, and you put in your registration, and it helps you do parking across different locations, and then it sells you insurance. So I think there's actually some interesting plays going on about how you organise motoring. I think that you'll see some stuff coming through those.
It would be very helpful for me, that reminder, that platform that caters to everything the privately owned car needs. But that is a business model that's built around private car ownership, and if we look towards a future where car sharing is more widely adopted, what are the risks for a platform like that, do you think?
So I think that car sharing will remain a niche, and a growing niche, an important one, until it's perceived as being part of the toolkit that cities have to improve air quality, sustainability, etc. I don't think it's going to grow beyond that niche. I think subscription services will quite happily, they could even, overtake private ownership at some point in the future, because a lease is pretty much a subscription anyway. So I think there's, private ownership, lease, subscription on a spectrum. I think there's kind of blurring of lines there, but I think car sharing in car clubs, I think, is a bit more difficult. I've worked in that space for a long time, and I always thought that I would continue to car share and I would never own a car. I now have a child, I have a car, right, and I have a car seat, because I couldn't find a car sharing service that gave me a car with a car seat when I needed it. And so as soon as the kid is old enough to not need a car seat, we'll probably go back to that. But at the moment, I am a proud owner of a vehicle.
What do you miss about when you were previously subscribing?
I like driving different cars. Also, and this is something that OEMs really struggle to track. I love driving BMWs and the whole ultimate driving machine and all that. I didn't really get the marketing before driving them. They're amazing to drive. I genuinely love them. But using a service like Drive Now or Zipcar, where you get used to driving a BMW or maybe it's a VW, I think influences future purchasing decisions. But OEMs have found it very hard to track that, because it's different organisations, different life stages. So you can never really assign the value of car sharing services to future purchases. I think if anyone was able to do that in a smart way, then I think OEMs would love to get back into car sharing.
Yeah, we've talked about that on a previous podcast actually, again with the guys from Turo, saying that they've talked to OEMs about kind of having the sharing and peer-to-peer as a way of extended test drives, particularly important for EVs when you're making that shift. Having an EV is not do you choose a BMW or a Mercedes, it's a lifestyle change, and being able to test that for kind of short periods, but then like longer periods, maybe a month or 2 months before getting into a purchase, I think is going to be really, really key. But like I say, the attribution for how you link those two back, I mean, it's difficult enough to link back an advert to a car purchase because of the complex journeys that people have to go through to online, and then to a dealer, then to a different dealer, then to a lease company, and someone leases a car through a leasing company, but it was an ad that they saw from a dealership as somewhere, like it's almost impossible. So to add these extra services in,
it's tricky. I remember OEMs thinking about if you own an EV, giving you access to a vehicle from a dealer locally if you're going long distance. So there was a lot of thought about how you could kind of do that through one platform. So yeah, I think there's a whole lot of stuff to come in that area. In the 1980s, OEMs owned rental companies. They then sold them. They then looked at getting into mobility services. I think there was 2015, there was kind of, we don't do mobility services, we make cars by a few OEMs. And now it's coming back around. I think Kinto, Stellantis, Kinto being Toyota, they're actually doing quite a lot of innovative things. But they're still often in small scale. But I think that the hype cycle and the kind of the secular nature of this will come back.
When does it? Sorry, I just want to ask about what you're saying about OEMs operating on a small scale with these services right now. When does it go beyond experimental? What is that barrier that they have to push through?
I think a good example is Moya in Hamburg, which is the VW on demand or demand responsive transport kind of premium minibus service where you have like kind of nice setup and you type on the way to work.
It's lovely. I've used it a couple of times.
Have you? I think it's great, and I'd love that to be. Via do some similar stuff in the UK. I'd love to see, and so does Elo actually. But sorry, just name dropping different companies, just in case Barney and Sam from Zelo get upset for me using more as a different example. But the point being that when autonomous vehicles kind of are kind of AVs are there, then I think you'll see a far more. They'll basically push the go on Moya going out of Hamburg and going lots of places. I think if you were them right now, you probably would refine, make sure you can make money in Hamburg, which I'm not sure they're doing yet, and then grow it. But as soon as you take the driver out, that becomes profitable. And that's taken a lot longer than a lot of. And did you hear about what's going on in San Francisco at the moment?
The traffic cones. The
traffic cones on the boot of cruise cars, which we could have told you about. Come to London with that and see what happens.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think it comes back to the mix thing we were saying with micromobility. I think with a lot of these services, they'll have to come together in a bit of a mix. So things like sharing and subscription, I've said for a long time, you subscribe where a household has 2 cars today, you subscribe to one, you share the second. Now, that's the kind of first iteration of people being able to, you have one car with a car seat in, but the second car that your wife drives is maybe can be shared because it's less challenging from that sense. And I think it's the same for some of these other mobility services. Is they've got I'm going to say niche applications, and also I don't want to upset Barney or Sam at Zelo, but they've got a huge opportunity with a niche, which is the demand responsive, particularly for like big locations, so big places that have got commutes, traffic going to them, commutes, either business parks, universities, or Amazon depots or whatever they might be. And that's a really, really good use of that service, but it's kind of like not mainstream in a city. The same thing at Via are in Milton Keynes, and they were they were there as their standalone service pre-COVID, closed, came back. They're now effectively replaced community transport. So again, they're serving like a different niche. So I think they kind of work and can make money where there's a specific need. But you say that there needs to be kind of the next level of innovation before they can become more mainstream. And they'll still be part of a wider mix, I guess. But it's really interesting seeing these kind of things spinning out. That Moya thing was very big at the time, the launch and the value.
A load of press. And I think it looks like it's a really good service. I'd love to see more of it. But I think there's just a kind of wait and see when AVs are really going to come in. I think only like a few weeks ago they were saying that you can buy the first Ford, which has autonomous driving capabilities in the UK right now.
Yeah.
So I think
that's a hands-off service, right? I think, and the first one that's been approved.
So I tried that on the M40. I went to the launch event, and you'd be invited to take your hands off at 70 miles an hour. The feeling is so unnatural for someone who's been driving cars for X amount of years, and then you're asked to take your hands off the wheel of something. But I think it's going to take a while for the consumer to trust these sorts of things. I think I'm quite an experienced driver, and I was a bit worried about it.
Yeah.
If I'm being asked to hop in a bus that's got no driver at the wheel and go into city traffic, I don't know whether that might be a barrier to adoption as well.
In 2014, Uber was saying that they were going to deliver it by 2018. I think we're a good few years off it yet, but and the social interplay between these services, like evidenced by Cruise in San Francisco at the moment, is going to take some getting used to. Yeah, interesting.
And in terms of some of the future trends, I know we sort of touched on the hot topics earlier, but I guess if we're thinking about the OEMs moving into some of these spaces, the rental companies that we mentioned, how do you see that element of it playing out? Are there some people to watch in the market?
I think Sixt are an incredible operator. Know them fairly well. I think they're a company that I would never bet against. I think they do an incredible job. Always innovating, looking at car sharing, chauffeur services, and the like. I think they've got they're always one to keep an eye on. Two other within the car rental space that I think are worth looking at: Virtuo, and also UFO. UFO being just a electric Tesla, kind of higher offering, but they've grown really quickly across the US and also Europe. And Virtuo, I've used that service for the last few years before buying a car. I think they've got a brilliant offering. What they've done is essentially allowed you to take the key from a mobile from a car and put it onto your phone via Bluetooth, and then they allow you to open up a Mercedes or a electric vehicle via that key via Bluetooth. Doesn't sound like a huge innovation. What it does is it puts those vehicles in underground car parks, which is somewhere that car sharing has traditionally not been able to go. So all of a sudden you've got a density of nice vehicles underground in car parks, which happens to be where a high density of people with disposable income live in cities. So they've really nailed it in terms of product market fit and I think utilization, and then you're able to manage those locations fairly well because it's back to base offering. So I think they're one to watch as well.
Yes, this has come up a couple of times, hasn't it? The future of the car key is a sort of metaphor for the way the mobility industry is changing.
And it's just opening up access to the vehicle, right? Because those services are kind of a blurring between rental and sharing. So the free floating sharing is really good, but how do you make sure that you've always got the right cars in the right place of service demand? It's a lot easier when you go, right, we're just going to have some fixed locations, but we're not going to make it behind a desk and a rental agreement. All those things you can put into an app, bring the key. The accessibility becomes as easy as a car sharing vehicle, but you start to create hubs, and again I think it's a way of getting some critical mass in these services. We've seen that work quite well. Sixt is a really interesting one as well. You mentioned, I've always thought has shared the same view that in that kind of, they are just in the top 5 rental company list. No one really realizes. I don't think they do much PR. We were talking about PR of things like Moya and stuff a second ago. They don't do much PR on their services, but they've kind of got all bases covered, and they are really innovating more than some of the other rental companies, I think. So that's going to be a fascinating watch to see whether they just continue to kind of cover. But it feels like they're not base covering, so it sounds like a thing, but they're getting into all these areas, but not necessarily pushing on any of them, but maybe waiting for one of them to really take off and then just pushing right into it.
They've got so many different businesses. They've got the subscription, they've got the ride hail, they've got the car sharing service, they've got the rental, and they've got vans. So you kind of think, there's and then there's the hidden business underneath though, which is the buying and selling of vehicles. You look at their balance sheet, they've however many thousands of cars that they managed to hold, and I think they actually did really well through COVID, while as a lot of other car rental companies didn't, because of the way they managed their fleet. So it's actually quite a complicated business, and they do a lot of press in Germany, but not much here.
Yeah, definitely going to be an interesting one. I think they're definitely one of the types of businesses that should be well positioned to benefit from these changes because of vehicles on the balance sheet, access to or points to access vehicles and all of that kind of thing. Probably the same with dealerships and links with OEMs. It's interesting how that relationship's changing through that subscription type environment. And we were thinking about Volvo and people like that. But is that an area that you see? Do you feel like the OEMs can get into a place to compete with people like Sixt in that area? Yeah.
So, I mean, you kind of got. I remember a few years ago, everyone was saying that you need to cut the dealers out of the value chain and go direct to consumer, because that's where the margins are made. But then OEMs traditionally aren't service-based businesses. They kind of sell a car and wave goodbye, and then the dealer's dealing with that. And if you look at the kind of rise and now decline and maybe stability, we hope, of the kind of kazoos and those organisations that you kind of cutting the dealers out for second-hand vehicle sales, I think you've got a kind of interesting dynamic to look at. That said, I think going back to the original point, lots of organisations would like to take or at least take some of the value out of what the dealers are offering, so reduce the margins of the dealers and go direct to consumer. So Volvo On Demand operating a fantastic product over in the Nordics. It's actually really impressive. It's a mixture of free floating, back to base, subscription service, and it's all done on a very, very good back end. They, I think, will be growing across Europe at some point. And they operate direct to consumer, and they're taking out the dealer. Whether or not that's followed across by all OEMs, I don't know. I think OEMs will probably want to reduce the power and the margins that dealers take, and that probably comes through the direct to subscription, the subscription models.
I think the dealer bit is a really interesting topic that comes up a lot. I think what's interesting with OEMs, I've always thought, when you talk to a customer and you say, where did you get your car from? I got my car from BMW. You bought it from a dealer, which is an independent franchise. OEMs don't sell cars. I mean, they have they're a national sales company in most markets, but the dealers actually sell the car. It was a wholesale to them. So they do the kind of top of the funnel marketing stuff and events and other things, but ultimately the sale happens with the dealers. It comes back to the attribution point earlier. Who did the sale? Where did that value come?
So I think it was iCabby or maybe it's Auto Fleet. 2 weeks ago, you saw that I think it's iCabby, which have an affiliation with Uber. They are now operating as a sales channel direct to taxi and private hire market. So they're able to kind of operate on that basis, going direct to consumer, and so they'll be the interface between OEMs and that market. And actually, I think Uber will probably participate in that in some way. So you do buy it from the dealer, but when you in your example, but I think dealers might also be subscription businesses or other organisations quite soon. And if you're subscribing rather than buying, does the dealer's relationship just become a kind of a maintenance one? they won't be happy with that, but that's maybe where the direction of travel is.
This lies at the heart of the agency debate. We're seeing a lot of car manufacturers now. The vast majority of global car manufacturers are moving to the agency model. Scrapping wholesales, taking that direct relationship with their customers, and not cutting the dealer out of the equation, because they still need these physical touch points. A lot of people still want to test drive a car, and as you say, there is the maintenance aspect to it. But you sort of wonder whether that could foster a subscription growth in the subscription sphere, because the car manufacturer is controlling the sale process, so they can shape it how they want.
I completely agree. I think that's exactly what's going to happen. I think if OEMs are going to do that themselves, they're going to need to bring a lot of skills in-house around actually managing customers, which is not something they've done before, traditionally at least.
Yeah, I also read some interesting stuff this week. That's kind of where I was going a bit with my point, actually, is that thing of an OEM, although they will have a sales director and they'll have a marketing team, it's all top of the funnel stuff. It's not transactional. And if you're going then to say, well, we're going to become a direct to consumer, you actually have to have some skills in house to be able to sell. And even if that's going to be digitally and it's going to be marketing led, it's like more bottom of the funnel stuff. And I've seen that there's been some kind of high profile moves in some of the OEMs of kind of leaders leaving and other things, retiring, doing other bits. And I saw someone commenting and saying, this is the bit of almost changing of the guard. If you're going to be direct to consumer, you need to have a business that's set up to be more like an e-com or a sales derived business rather than actually a wholesale business, which is what an OEM is. There's also the challenges around the balance sheet. You said about 6 balance sheet and all the vehicles. OEMs don't have vehicles on the balance sheet because they go get wholesale to a dealer, and a dealer either sells them to a leasing company or finances them. So there's also some of those challenges as well. But in theory, they should be really well placed for this stuff, and the dealers should have a role, a kind of transactional customer care role. But there's a few big gaps to fill, I think, in some of those spaces, whereas someone like Six maybe is sitting there with all of the tools they need to be able to do it. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Well, on that note of maybe optimism / uncertainty, it feels like a good point to bring this to a close. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing all that insight with us. It's been fascinating. And,
pleasure.
I'm sure you need a nap now after your big bike ride yesterday.
Get back on my bike.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah,
maybe just the one today.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Thank you very much for coming in, Chris.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time. Thank you.